All right. Well, good morning. This is Erin Bell, and I am the Assistant Director of Educational Development at the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Detroit Mercy. And I also have the distinct pleasure of working as a member of our English department as an adjunct professor. And I'm joined today with Maria Ibarra-Frayre, Deputy Director of We the People Michigan, and also a University of Detroit Mercy alumni. I'm so pleased that you could join me today, and I'm really excited to hear about your role at We the People. But before we even do that, I'd like to hear a little bit about your educational journey. So, to start off, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what led you to Detroit Mercy, what your major was, how did you come into our community?
Mm, Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been quite a journey. So I graduated in 2012, which is over 10 years ago now, which is feels like yesterday. Um, and I ended up at Detroit Mercy because honestly, I wish I had some like big, beautiful story. It was just the school that I could afford. I grew up undocumented, and at that time, there weren't a lot of options for college for undocumented folks. So the University of Detroit Mercy was one of the few universities that it didn't matter to them that I didn't have a social security number, and I got a pretty good scholarship. So it ended up kind of just being by default that that was the school that I could afford to go to. Um, but when I was there, I started off as an undecided. I knew I liked writing. I wanted to study something related to like literature or journalism, something that like would allow me to write, but I wasn't quite sure what that was. So I started off as an undeclared major and then was communications for a little bit. So that maybe wanted to be a journalist. And then um, I think I went back maybe to undeclared. It was a lot of going back and forth. I ultimately ended up doing English with a focus in creative writing. And then near the second half of my sophomore year, I decided to do social work as well because that felt like um, the career path the most vaguely allowed me to do community organizing, which is what I thought I wanted to do at that time. I kind of had a hunch that I wanted to do community organizing. I was right. But social work ended up being the broadest pathway to do organizing. And still feel like, okay, I'm graduating with a degree that when I say I have a social work degree, people kind of know what that means.
Understood, understood. And I really appreciate this because the focus of my class this semester that I'm teaching, while it is a composition course, we're focusing on community. So I think you're
Mhm.
such a great fit for interviewing and chatting with. But I was looking at your CV and your LinkedIn profile. So you were at Detroit Mercy. What sort of other educational paths did you take after that?
So after that, I thought when I was in college, I got really involved with an immigrant youth group, and we were doing a bunch of work at the local and federal level to try to pass some kind of immigration policies. And I thought I wanted to be an immigration lawyer. So right after undergrad, I remember even studying for the LSAT, getting like preparing to like, okay, maybe I'm going to be a lawyer. I ended up doing the Justice Volunteer Corps right after, where I worked as a paralegal and for an immigration clinic in Milwaukee. And after that, I was like, nope, actually, immigration or being a lawyer, I don't, there wasn't the immigration aspect. It was like being a lawyer is actually not for me. I wanted to have more creativity. Immigration law is just it's really hard. You lose most of the time. Um, there's not. It's like there's a law and you have to work within it, and there's really no way around it. So after that, I worked for a nonprofit for a couple of years, and then it was like, okay, actually, what I really do love doing is like I really do love writing, and I'm not 100% sure that like that alone is fulfilling both financially and otherwise.
Very
So I ended up doing a master's of social work at the University of Michigan. And by this time, I was sure that like what I wanted to be doing was community organizing, primarily with undocumented folks. So that's where I was like, okay, social work again seems like a broad enough degree where I could go do community organizing. I don't know why. I think I've always just had this thing of like, I need to be able to fall back on something, and that thing that I need to fall back on needs to be broad enough so people sort of generally conceptualize what that is, but also I can make my own way within it. So within being a social worker, I was able to say like, okay, people know what that means, and I can also focus on organizing in the way that makes sense to me, in the wherever it is that I find a job, however I can shape that. Community organizing also is like very broad. So it was a good in between.
I think that's really smart too, and especially as we're speaking to undergraduates, I
Yeah.
like that you're touching upon this idea that it took you a little while to kind of find the right and best fit and trying on different sort of maybe professional identities, seeing what makes the most sense, but also having that kind of fallback plan. I also was a journalism major, and I've done the
Mhm.
thing where now at my age, I've done like the two major career shifts, starting from journalism and then ending up in higher education after a couple of different degree paths. So I think it's good that young people know that. So you've already sort of touched a little bit upon what I wanted to chat about today, but this idea of writing and effective communication. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to how, good communication skills and or writing skills play a role in this idea of community organization, because I really want to drive home to students that the different career paths they take, writing and communication, I think, are a really essential skill set for all
Yes. Oh,
areas. But what
yes.
kind of how do they work in what you do from day to day?
Yeah, a few different ways. So I have the like the technical skills that we need in a job. And then there's also the dreaming and the visionary of like how I connect. For me, community organizing and poetry are both about creating a new world. And that's to me, that's like such a sacred connection, as both organizers and poets or writers are tasked with imagining what it would be like to live in a different world. And that feels really connected to me. But there's like the technical things that I for a job in community organizing, for a job really anywhere you need, and then there's the visionary aspect. So I'll touch on both. So the first one is that I now in my role as a deputy director, I end up doing a lot of grant writing, which never considered as a possibility for me when I was an undergrad. Never, I was like, I want to be a writer. So therefore, career path is grant writer. Just kind of came out of the blue, but it started because, well, as part of the role, but I really, when I started off as an organizer in my current organization, and I really asked my supervisor, I was like, this is a skill that I want to learn. One, because I know it's going to be useful. And two, because I just need, like, I actually really enjoy having like 2 hours by myself. My job requires that I talk to so many people all the time. There's a lot of meetings, but the time where I can just be like, okay, I'm going to go to a coffee shop and sit down and work on this just by myself is actually just such a welcome relief. Maybe that's not the case for many people, but it is for me. So I spend most of my day in meetings. And then there's I don't deal with this as much of the like, how do we explain our work to regular people, which is community organizing is beautiful and it's often very jargony. So when we're talking about, let me see if I can find an example. When we say things like, we're working for a world in which everyone feels safe. It's like, what does that even mean? Like how would a normal person understand that? It's like, oh no, actually, we're working for a world in which you have a driver's license and if you're undocumented. So trying to make it as specific as possible. One of the things that we've learned through lots of research and polling and testing groups, work that we've done, is that it's not that people don't agree with our ideas of what the kinds of policies and the kinds of laws that we want to change in Michigan, is they don't think that they're possible. So as much as we can to be specific about the change that we're trying. So like we want a place and where there's justice for all. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for a normal, everyday, regular person who doesn't have this experience of here are all the laws that are getting in the way, or here's the context for that I have to know. So it's something that I'd really try to work with my team of like, okay, we have to be, what is it that we're saying? And we have to just say it directly. Particularly because again, I grew up as undocumented. English was my second language. A lot of the family that and people that I care about speak primarily Spanish. So I'm trying as much as possible to make it a simple, direct, um, and also exciting. Like we use a lot of jargony language. The other day I had to sit down with one of my organizers and was like, okay, you keep saying these words in your presentation. I'm not sure that most people know what they mean. Like, why is it important for you to say these words? Are you trying to like communicate? Are you doing some like education? If so, that makes sense, but you should explain what these words are, and why you keep saying them. And actually, like, I want to know, like, why is it important for you to keep using the language? Like, for example, just give you a random example of a word that you kept saying that we're like, I'm not really sure you need to say, what was it? Extractive economy. Yeah. Where I'm just like, we either explain what that means or we use different language. So most people don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means. So,
Yeah.
um, and I work in words. I think you bring up such an interesting point, and that kind of ties back to what we do in the classrooms at Detroit Mercy, which is this idea. We've been talking a lot about genres, but also this idea of discourse community and kind of switching back and forth and code switching and thinking about voice and
Mhm.
vocabulary, because some of those words, those like kind of jargonistic and specific vocabulary, if we're trying to reach a broad audience, we
Yeah.
really have to be mindful of
Mhm.
that. And I myself fall into that as well, as I'm sure you know, sometimes in the field of literary studies, there is a lot of jargon, a lot of
Yes.
vocab
Yeah.
that might not be accessible to all of our learners, to all of our audience members. So I think that's such a great point that you bring up. And for students to be mindful of as well when they're writing essays, if they are pre-engineering, if they're using some language that's not
Mhm.
going to be known to everyone, explaining it or breaking it down. But I like that you asked that coworker, like, why was that word important to them? Because sometimes I feel like students, if they keep using that, maybe there's some other thing that they're trying to express there. There's something else. They're like, this is really important. This is why I keep using that. So
Yeah.
I love that you bring that up. And then I also like that you mentioned writing for bilingual audiences or sometimes even trilingual audiences,
Mhm.
because something I've noticed a lot, even as a native, English is my first language, is when I go into some of the more bureaucratic websites, um, information about law, about policy. I feel like that's also written in a way that's not accessible to people and many people, native speakers included. So is it important in your work then? You kind of already touched upon this, but making sure the language is really accessible to folks across our community, whether they might speak Spanish or Arabic or Romanian or Polish. Does that becomes a pretty big issue then in your work that you?
Yeah, yeah, especially because we also do work with Spanish and Arabic speaking communities as part of our work with We the People Michigan. So we're constantly, and it's really hard. It takes a lot of effort, and it's effort that's worth it, but it is really hard. How do we create language materials in English that are easily understood? They're for um, a person who's not constantly thinking about these things, they would understand them. But then how do we also work with translators and interpreters to make sure that we're sharing material in Spanish? We haven't done as much as Arabic. We are slowly building a Muslim American base of folks that will speak primarily Arabic. So that's slowly coming, but doing multilingual work is beautiful and really hard.
Yeah, I think that's one of the special things about living and working in the Metro Detroit area is that I see this as an asset. We have so many brilliant people speaking in different languages, able to
Mhm,
connect and
mhm.
communicate. And I think that's really one of my favorite reasons that I love working at Detroit Mercy. So this is like a little bit of a throwback question, and I know time is of the essence, and it's kind of like something I think a lot about. But is there anything that you would kind of wish you would have known while you were an undergraduate student that would have made your journey any easier? You have some very specific, probably challenges, I would imagine, as a
Mhm.
DECA recipient. But is there anything
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, Maria, I wish I would have
Mhm.
known, back, 10 years ago, or that you would tell students now about
Hmm.
their educational journey to make it easier or more profound, or any words of
Hmm.
wisdom in that sense?
Yeah. Let me think. Well, there's one that comes to mind that I did know and I'm actually very proud of, which is one I had a lot of people when I first. So I was an English major, just alone English for 2 years, and I had a lot of people, including my parents, tell me like, why, what, immigrant parents were like, do you have a clear career path from an English degree? Are you going to be a teacher? Are you going to be like, what is it that you're going to do with this English degree? And honestly, I didn't know. I didn't know. But I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. I knew that what I loved. There's I often share this with like there's two things I know just to be true about what I'm supposed to be doing in the world, which is one is being a writer, and the other is being a community organizer. The writer came first, and that's what I started off in undergrad, and I'm so happy that I did. I loved being an English major. I think the English department at Detroit Mercy is a hidden gem that I don't know if I want more people to know about it because then it would change drastically, but I just remember having such beautiful classes of 10 people and it was intimate and it was uh, an opportunity to look at writing and literature in a way that I had never anticipated would happen at Detroit Mercy because again, I didn't go there because of the English department. I went because that's what I could afford. And it worked out that I just found such a beautiful place. So I would for students who are like, I know the pressure is real. I know that what your parents tell you matters because as a coming from immigrant parents, that meant a lot to me. And at the end of the day, 4 years and probably many thousands of dollars is a big thing to waste feeling unhappy the whole time that you're there. And it's also not just that, it's like this is going to set you up for your career. And if you're going into something that you're not happy with, it's okay to be unsure and it's okay to change your mind. But if you know that this is not for you and you keep doing it just because of pressure, then that's going to be really hard.
Definitely. And I've heard
Hmm.
that. I've heard about some of those pressures, especially
Yeah,
from lots of students groups, but in
yeah.
particular, sometimes first gen college students,
Hmm.
because there's a pressure to succeed, to be sort of emblematic of the community,
Hmm.
and more stresses and pressures depending on
Yeah,
if you're the first one or maybe like you're the middle child in the family. So I think that really speaks to me as well. And I think that's really important that people know that it's okay. But I've heard that from students like, well, why do you want to be this? And well, that's what my parents told me I should be.
yeah,
But what do you want? Because
yes. What is it that you want?
that's
Yeah,
going to be another stress moving forward. If you're not really feeling engaged and impassioned
yeah,
with that topic when you're 20, chances are you're not going to feel that way when you're 25 or 30.
yeah,
So I think it's really great
yeah,
advice.
yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about writing and the role it plays. I like that you sort of talked about the English department because I have a lot of students that will say, well, I really don't like writing. I don't, I'm not good at it. But could you speak to like maybe even the role of like maybe there are students that don't feel great at writing, but isn't there maybe a connection that you see between like critical thinking, like puzzling through things,
Hmm.
media literacy? So, what would you say to my students that maybe some of them don't really enjoy the writing process the way someone like you and I do? I love
Hmm.
writing. It's actually fun to me when you were talking
Hmm.
about being in the coffee house. I'm like, yes, I totally get that. But the
Hmm.
students who say, oh, I don't really like it, I'm not really good at it, what can they pull out of writing, even if it's not that they go on to be grant writers or writing
Hmm.
poetry? Is
Hmm.
there anything that they might be able to pull out of the writing process that might help them in other careers that you can think of?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. I mean, honestly, so much, particularly now post-COVID, just so much of your communication happens over writing. We have a team of 40, about 45 people, and they're spread out all over the state. So there's people that I see in person that I talk to every day over Slack, which is our messaging, or over email, but I see them in person maybe once or twice a year. Um, and also when you have a team of 45, when you're responsible for drafting policy, like organizational policy or sharing updates or memos. So they have to be clear and to the point. So there's just this thing of like, just at the very minimum, you're gonna have to figure out, like, you have to communicate with people, and it's gonna have to be more than just like text messaging. Like, it will have to be, sadly, that's the world in which we live in, where you have to send email to people. Um, for a long time, I used to think when I was in undergrad that I had to uh all these like the kind of like famous great works from all the people, like, Fitzgerald and all these mostly white
Mhm.
men, who I was like, I have to read all of them in order to feel like I have the credit as an English major. And some of them that I honestly just didn't like and didn't enjoy, but I felt like I had to force myself to do it, until I got to the point where I was like, actually, no. Like, who decided that these were the greatest authors of all time? Like, I'm gonna read sorry, my dog just clawing away at the floor. I'm going to read the things that I enjoy reading. And even if this is not some like greatest works of all time, but I enjoy it. So I think that it does take a little bit of rewiring for your head, of like giving yourself permission to read the things that you enjoy, find whatever it is that is. Like, don't feel like you have to conform yourself into a box. And that goes with everything else, not just like what it is that you're reading or writing. Um, I know that there's more related to like the way that your brain works and how it is that you're thinking. I just actually don't know if I could speak much to that, but it does require that you have patience and willing to stick it out even when it's hard, and to know when you are going to pivot and read. I have a friend who says that for her, reading is like a snack for her brain, because she just reads whatever she wants to read. She reads like a sappy romance novel or a sci-fi novel or poetry, and
Yeah.
like that's great.
I love that. I love that. Sustenance for the mind, right? I'm actually reading
Mhm.
a really like long-winded sci-fi series, and that's fine, and I
Mhm.
think it's so smart because students will say, I don't like to read. I'm like, I don't think you found your genre,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's okay if you want to read Sports Illustrated magazine.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's reading
Yeah.
as well. Or you
Yeah.
read,
Or listen to audiobooks.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
happy with that. And I think that's a thing I would tell students too, is like when you're immersing yourself in these different works of whether it's literature or journalistic writing, they're learning style. They're seeing how it
Mhm.
works. They're whether they realize it or not, they're like picking up on some of those clues and cues. Well, Maria, I really thank you for your time today. Before we sign off, if students were interested in learning more about your organization as far as like what you do or, what that looks like, where could they find out more about We the People? Is there like a website or where could they connect to learn more about what you do and maybe offer support to that organization in the future?
Yes, let me put it here. Here's our website. I'll put it in the chat. It's we the people mi.org. And then I'm going to put my email to my work email.
It's so generous. Thank you so much. And just one thing I always like to ask people before we sign off, what are you reading now? And what is like a book you might recommend to students? Any book that
Mhm.
you enjoy or that
Oh, so many
you think
books. Well, I
before
just
we start?
started, actually, I just finished the Hunger Games
Hi.
book, the new one. When I went to go see the movie, and I was like, I need to know how different this is.
Yes.
Um, yeah, it was good. It was long, but I'm actually finishing, or I'm starting to read my friend's book. She just wrote a book and she asked me to write the foreword.
Oh, great.
Um, so I just printed it out. I haven't started reading it yet, but I'll let you know. I think it should be I think the publishing date is going to be maybe like June of this year.
Cool.
It's called Tejiendo. Um, and books that I recommend. I One of my favorite authors is Julia Alvarez, who
Yes.
she's a is it Dominican? Yeah, Dominican Republic. Writes about her. A lot of it is like uh, hit, what is the term? Historical nonfiction. There we go. Right, historical
Yeah.
nonfiction. Who writes about um, coming to the U.S. As a child from the Dominican Republic, escaping the dictatorship in the Dominican Republic. My favorite book of hers is In the Time of the Butterflies, which actually kind of makes sense. That would be one of my favorite books because it's about four sisters that are part of the resistance against the Trujillo dictatorship. It's actually based on a set of four sisters who were involved in the resistance, and three of them were murdered on their way to go see their husbands, had been locked up because also they were part of the resistance. It's so beautiful. Another one of her books that I really, really love is How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent. Um, that's about coming into the US. And then one that I still love, that I haven't read in a while, I used to read it every like couple of years, is Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides, who is just I would say that one's a bit controversial, but he just has such a beautiful writing style. Just his writing style. Honestly, he could write a non-sensory plot and I would still read it just because the way he writes is just so beautiful to me.
Yeah, that's one that I actually read. I went to Marygrove for my master's, so that was a little while ago, but he was one of the featured guest speakers, and I just remember that. That's a thick book. I mean, it's like I think
Hmm.
500 pages, but I just was like,
Hmm.
boop, boop, like I read it in a
Yeah,
couple of days. It was such a page turner. So
yeah.
there's some great
And it's about Detroit. I mean, not
no,
just
you're
about
like,
Detroit, but it
hey, I
has themes
know.
about
Like,
Detroit. Yeah.
yeah, I love that. It's like you can recognize the streets, or like, I'm like, oh, where, what section
Yeah.
is he talking about here? Where was the restaurant? So I love that book too.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we could chat about books for hours and hours, but thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate your wisdom, and thanks for being such an awesome representative of our Detroit Mercy community within the greater
Thank
community. It's
you.
so great to see the work you're doing, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks. I'm gonna
Thank